Okay, so we left off in Perek Gimel Halacha Yud in the Rambam. Hagi Erev Shvius Shenichnasu L'Shvius. So fruit that wasn't completely ripened yet from the 6th year that is now in Shmitta. V'shal Shvius Yotzei Motzei Shvius. And if it's from the Shmitta year that went into the 8th year, Lo Sachin V'Lo Menakvin, you're not allowed to rub those with oil. So the Mishnah was specifically talking about figs, I think. So even though the previous halacha you said you're allowed to rub them with oil or make a hole in them, that's when that was not needed to make them ripe. But for these unripened figs, they're not going to ripen unless you rub them with oil and make a hole in them. So you're not allowed to do that on Shmitta because that's work on the tree. So when we spoke on Shavuos night about the Chazon Ish's kula that you're allowed to do things to save the crop, I guess he would have to say that doing a little bit of pruning is to save the crop, but this is too much work they would have to do. Uvizman hamikdash ein bona madregos al pi hageos erev shvius misha yipasko agshamim mipnei shu misasken l'shvius. In the time the Beis Hamikdash, you're not allowed to build steps by the streams on erev shvius or by the valleys erev shvius once the rain stops because you're fixing it for the Shmitta. So So we spoke about it that when we were learning the Mishnayos, the first didn't understand building the steps, but what I'm pretty sure it means is that for certain fields that get irrigated or the water has to flow down to it, so the steps here you're making steps so that the water will flow down the steps into the field. So that's a real improvement that you're making in the ground of the field itself, so the water goes there. So you're not allowed to do that after the rain ends in the 6th year because you're fixing it for the 7th year. So Rav Kook says brings the Rash and the Bartanura that you're not allowed to rub the unripened figs that even though they're from the 6th year that go into the 7th year, because meaning they don't ripen until after Rosh Hashanah. And in the previous halacha when he said you're allowed to rub oil into the fruits, that's talking about fruits that had completely ripened in the 6th year. And then the Rash also brings an opinion that in the 6th year, you're allowed to rub oil into any fruit. And the Isser is only once it's the Shemitah of the 7th year. Meaning, even though this fruit is produce of the 6th year, once it's Rosh Hashanah and now it is Shemitah, you're not allowed to rub oil in the fruit. And once Rosh Hashanah happened and now it's the calendar says Shemitah, you're no longer allowed to rub fruit, even though it's definitely 6-year produce. The Yesh Misha Omer, and there is an opinion, the Mishnah Rishona, that this prohibition applies even nowadays, even though there's no Tosefah Shvius. We don't add on to Shemitah in the time that there's no Beis Hamikdash. It's still, according to the earlier opinion, you're still not allowed to rub it in the 6th year because you're going to allow it to ripen in the 7th year, even though you're not rubbing the oil in the 6th year. Then on the second part of the Rambam, about building the steps. So it appears from the Tosfos Anshe Shem, says Rav Kook, that the main prohibition about building these steps is since you're fixing it for Shemitah, it is prohibited because of the requirement to add on to Shmitta. Therefore, it's only prohibited in time of the Beis Hamikdash. But now it's still prohibited, not because of Tosefes Shvius, but because of Maras Ayin. It looks like you're doing something prohibited, because we're worried that people are going to say that you're improving your field so that it'll have water to have forbidden irrigation water during Shemitah year. So therefore, this halacha applies even when the Beis Hamikdash doesn't stand. So it's a machlokas. According to some opinions, this halacha applies even nowadays. According to the Rash, that the only problem of building these steps is Maras Ayin, because it looks like you're fixing your field, so it could be improperly watered on Shmita. It would be applicable nowadays, but you're allowed to build it during the Shmita year after the rainy season is over, because you're not going to get any benefit during Shmita out of it anymore. So let's say after Pesach time of Shmita, what we're in right now, they would be allowed to build these steps to let the water come on them, because it's extremely unlikely that any rain would happen in Israel now, so it's not fixing the field. It's not improving the field. And I said that today, or I said that a different week. So I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were talking about the comparison between Shemitah and Chol HaMoed. So the problem is, if those steps were being damaged, would you be allowed to fix them on Chol HaMoed? So on Chol HaMoed, you're allowed to fix damage that's going to get even worse. So the question is, does that apply only to houses, or even, let's say it would apply to a fence? But then again, even those two things, well, a house certainly, but a fence could harm people in the Rishus Rabbim in the public way if it would collapse there, and that would be a different problem. But here, if it's in the middle of the field, I'm really not. I'm not sure if this would qualify if these steps were decaying. If it would be mutter during Shemitah, because of the meaning, if it would have been broken on Chol HaMoed, would you be allowed to fix it? It's highly unlikely, but I'd have to look into that topic. But I would doubt it. But yeah, that is what I said, and that was the context in which I said it. So thank you for remembering. The Pasuk Shulchan brings down that nowadays so he assumes that there is no prohibition to build these steps for the water on Erev Shemitah. So he says you're not allowed to build. There's no permission to build it on Shemitah. So therefore, according to the opinion who says, we're dealing with a lot of different opinions now. According to the opinion that you're not allowed to build it on Shemitah itself, even after the rainy season is over. So, but according to the opinion, if you're not allowed to build it during the 6th year because you're preparing it for Shemitah, once it's after Pesach on Shmita, like we are right now, then you're allowed to fix the steps because it's only being fixed for the 7th year. I think I read the beginning wrong. The Pasuk Shulchan says you're allowed to build your the Pasuk Shulchan says you're allowed to build the steps during the 6th year. So if you're allowed to build it on the 6th year, then you're not allowed to build it on the 7th year. But according to the opinion, Rav Kook is saying that we forbid you to build it on the 6th year because we hold you're fixing it for Shemitah. Nowadays, we are allowed to fix it. Meaning he's saying according to the logic of the Pasuk Shulchan, and his opinion is you're allowed to fix it to build it in the 6th year, but not in the 7th year. But I guess Rav Kook is holding like the opinions that the prohibition of building these steps applies even in the 6th year because you're preparing it for Shemitah. Then you are allowed to build it now, right this time of year, because you're preparing it for the 8th year, which we're allowed to grow and plant things and stuff. Yud Aleph, the last halacha in this parak. Even nowadays, we're not allowed to plant trees You're not allowed to graft. You're not allowed to be mavriach. So mavriach is some type of thing that when a vine has, I guess, some type of shoot that's coming out, you somehow put like some type of stake in the ground, and so that it would grow up, and then that's going to become, I guess, eventually you're going to disconnect it from the original. Well, it's not, no. So mavrichin is grafting. So grafting. So grafting is you drill a hole in the bark, and you stick a different tree in there, and you a different branch in there, and you tie it together. So that's havracha, and then that's markivin, and then mavrichin is when you have this shoot that's coming out of one vine or tree, you extend it there and you kind of bend it up, so it's going to start growing up like it's its own tree, and I think it's going to start making like little roots underneath, and then I think you're eventually going to disconnect it from the parent tree that it originally came from. So you're only allowed to do that if the planting is going to take, and there's going to be 30 days after it takes until Rosh Hashanah. Meaning, last Rosh Hashanah was Shvius. If you wanted to graft onto the tree, I think we passed, he's going to say it's 44 days, I think. So if you did it 44 days before Rosh Hashanah, either of these three things, planting the tree or grafting or setting this shoot into the ground, you have to do at least 44 days before Rosh Hashanah, because then it's considered that it took root before Rosh Hashanah. And this applies nowadays. So stam klita shtei Shabbosos, and the general taking root is 2 weeks. And this is prohibited always, meaning not just in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, because of marasayin. It looks wrong. Shema yomer hara b'shviyas natu. People might think, oh, they planted it during Shmitta. Nimtzes omer shenoteo mavrach ha'amarke v'shviyas kodem Rosh Hashanah barba v'arba'im yom yikayim. So therefore, we find that if someone plants or grafts or set up this shoot that was coming out from a vine or whatever, the 6th year, right before Rosh Hashanah, 44 days, then you could let it keep growing. But pachos mekan yakor, if they did it within 44 days of Rosh Hashanah, it must be uprooted. But if you didn't uproot it, you are allowed to have the fruits eventually, because remember, the fruits are going to, well, right, that's what I'm saying. You're going to have to wait a few years anyway because of Orla, and anyway. So once it is what? Right. So it's going to be at least 3 years till you'll be allowed to eat the fruit anyway, and then the 4th year to bring to Yerushalayim. So we say that fruit will be permitted, but it's not like you're going to plant the tree and then you could have the fruit right away. It's not going to happen. And I mean, and what I was told, this is many years ago, I mean, when I was my first year in Israel, is that most things, when you plant them, they're not going to develop fruits right away. It could be. So some people say, or even when it's a young tree, even if it has fruits, it's not really consumable. It's not ready for human consumption. So it's not like the Orla is making an undue hardship on people to keep halachas of Orla. Yeah, it would count. Yeah. Even if it doesn't produce fruit, but it would count. Once it was planted, it would count as the first year of Orla. Orla's diraisa outside of Israel. Oh, is Orla still diraisa nowadays? I don't remember. In Chutz La'aretz, it only applies as a halacha Moshe Sinai, but it's a separate mitzvah. It doesn't follow all the mitzvahs of Orla. But nowadays in Israel, if Orla applies, I think it does, but I have to look it up. I don't remember. Possibly, but what would it not apply to? Purim. Oh, so that's a separate issue. So that's it. We're not talking about that at all. So that's in regard to Kalayim. Let's say, So grafting, I'll just bring so a big problem is they would graft, esrog trees are very delicate, so sometimes they would take a lemon tree and graft the esrog onto the lemon tree. So according to many opinions, that's no longer an esrog because it's a mixture. I believe the Chazon Ish is lenient on there and says that they're both citrus, they're close enough related that it's not a problem, but I think that the people who use Chazon Ish's rogim don't rely on that. But I didn't see it inside the Chazon Ish that he was lenient for that. But I mean, I looked up on YouTube a couple years ago, and they were talking about putting different types of apples onto one tree, grafting different types, so you could have 4 varieties of apple from the same tree because they're all apples. And then also they said a benefit for that, this is not Jewish people, this is Stam. And they're saying also they ripen at slightly different times, so you'll have fruits a couple of different times a year. So I mean, if you're grafting something, different apples onto an apple tree, I don't see that would be usher for us to do either. Now, I mean, kalayim is an illegal mixture similar to shatnez. Shatnez is a form of kalayim, linen and wool together, except that's not planting. That's even sewing them together, weaving them together. But in regard to making some type of hybrids, like I guess tangerines or whatever, so it seems that a Jew wouldn't be allowed to do it, but if a goy did it, then we're allowed to eat the fruit, and we're allowed to then keep growing after that. Pomelo?
Yeah, pomelo.
Oh, that's a mixture also? Pomelo. Pot with a P. Pomelo. I found it, I don't know, sometimes I found it here on Dempster at the fruit market. And it's like a grapefruit, except it's bigger, it's green, and it has a lot of rind. So why would they, if yeah, right. If a goy did it, you could did it originally, even you're allowed to do it. But why do they? I don't know why they would have made it, because usually they try to make things to be better. And this has so much rind, it doesn't seem to be better. No, I'm serious. Is it less bitter? Oh, it grows easier. Okay. So it has a drawback of having a thicker rind, but it grows easier. Okay. Okay. That could be, yeah. What if the person who had planted it or had grafted it, what if he died before it was uprooted? We obligate his heir, his son, whatever who inherits him, to destroy it. So just because he dies, we don't say you could leave it. We still want to destroy that fruit, which was illegally planted or grafted, etc. Tomatillo, a green thing that they make, some green chili. Yeah, they make some type of like green salsa out of it and some other stuff. Tomatillo. I don't know. So again, one thing that it's a little bit that I don't exactly understand how it works. I mean, I shouldn't say it, that's not true. But some things that I don't understand so well is when certain things that the Mishnah mentions and the translation that people give are translations of New World fruits that certainly didn't exist until not just the Mishnah, but until the 1500s. People didn't know about it. Right. Corn is big. Sansino always translates dagan as corn. They never saw corn in their life. They never dreamed about corn. Now, someone who used to come to Moshe Shiur, he said that the word corn is a cognate. He didn't use that word of the word grain, but the ka and the ga and corn and grain, the R and the N. So that's the corn. They made up a name, but to sound like, but to translate it as corn is 100% wrong, and it's imprecise and it's inaccurate. And I don't know why they do that. And that's just one of the minor mistakes that Sansino makes. Rav Aaron once went on a giant.
Everybody.
No, not everyone translates dagan as corn. Sansino always does, because to say dagan is grain, that makes sense. They don't do grain. I don't know, maybe. But Rav Aaron is extremely critical that whenever it says goy, it translates it as a Gentile. Or an Oved Kochavim is a Gentile. He says no, it doesn't mean a Gentile. It means someone who is a pagan who worships various different deities. So there's a massive difference, and he was extremely critical of the Santino for that. And he said Santino makes anti-Semites, right? People who read it and think that it's so anti-Gemara, and it's true. He was not in the era of Google at all. There were search engines at the end of his life, not that he ever saw, but Google certainly wasn't invented. But there are, neo-Nazis and Jew-hating people who quote from the Santino to say how non-Jew the Gemara is, and it's not accurate because using a Santino translation. But my point here wasn't to criticize, wasn't to go on a list the problems of Santino. So, but so rice was clearly an ancient food because they probably had it in Far East Asia, Southeast Asia, whatever, for thousands of years. When did people actually cultivate it in the time of the Mishnah? I don't know. Our Mishnah our Mishnayos in Shvius spoke about the patties that were growing rice or millet. But I mean, have I ever heard about rice being cultivated in Israel? I have not. I mean, it could have been that with Jews out of there for almost 2,000 years, maybe at one time they had, and then people stopped, and the Bedouins didn't care about it, so they didn't do it either. But I don't know. But it's a general question that I have. Something that we know that is not indigenous to Israel or to Eretz Yisrael, and the Mishnah lists varieties or species that we translate as that. What exactly did they do it at some time? Some things it's possible, yes, because rice, they didn't know what rice was from the Far East, but corn, absolutely not. No, I said they did know about rice because rice exists in China for thousands of years. But the question is, did they grow it? Did they? I mean, not you don't grow whatever it grows in a patty, whatever. Did they have patties in Israel for that? Mitzrayim, they didn't have rice. It wasn't. No, it was from the Far East. The question is, did they try to cultivate it in Israel and historically 2,500 years ago or 2,000 years ago? Maybe, I don't know, because from the fact that our mission is, so I'm just saying that's a historical technical thing. It doesn't apply to, I mean, obviously it applies to the din because the Mishnah says that if you had the rice or the millet, it grows in patties, and because it doesn't get harvested in one time, we just take the whole harvest as when did it reach a third of its produce. If a third of the growth, whatever, was by Rosh Hashanah time, then the whole thing is considered 60-year produce, and you don't have to apply the laws of Shmitta for it. No, there's a character about that. Probably something out of town.
Every year I see how much complicated it's crazy. It's crazy. Going there and it go. I just well, no, but they keep doing it.
Okay, so the Melecha Shlomo, says Rav Kook in the second parak of Shvius, says, this halacha, when you need to uproot, when you planted it within 44 days before Rosh Hashanah Shmita, is only if it was unknown. We don't know if it was done within the 30 days or not. But if we know by some type of test, which I assume includes a laboratory test, that we know that it was done before the prohibited time, then you don't have to uproot it. that which we say that if you don't know, you need to assume that it takes 2 weeks for it to take root. That's only if we don't know if it took root or not. If we would be able to test it somehow and we know it took root in less than 14 days, let's say it only took 8 days and it took root, then if it was done 39 days before Rosh Hashanah, then you don't have to uproot it. So according to this Melech Shlomo, you don't always have to uproot it if it was planted or whatever within 44 days of Rosh Hashanah. Only if you you're not sure if you don't know for sure that it took root. But if you know for sure by some type of technological thing, you know it took root in less than 2 weeks, then we say it did take root. And then so if it took root at least 30 days before Rosh Hashanah of Shmita, you do not need to uproot it. The Chachamim only said stam, in general, it takes 2 weeks. But if we know for sure that it took root in less than 2 weeks, it took root in less than 2 weeks. There's no prohibition. And Rabbeinu Tam in Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud says there's no prohibition to plant if it's going to take root in less than 30 days of Shmita, and therefore it's only prohibited to plant within 44 days. Meaning, let's say he knows it's going to take, Rabbeinu Tam says, let's say we know it's going to take 3 weeks for it to take root. So does that mean we need to take the 30 days plus 3 weeks? Rabbeinu Tam says no. The only thing Rabbeinu Tam says we don't need the 30 days before Shemitah. So therefore he says you could plant it within a month of Shemitah, but not of Rosh Hashanah, but not within 2 weeks of Shemitah. Because then if it's within 2 weeks of Shemitah, it's going to take root possibly on Rosh Hashanah, so that we can't rely on. Then the Rash says in the Mishnah here in the second parak. So we're in the third parak of the Rambam, but these Mishnayos are in the second parak in Maseches Shvius. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, that the laws of adding on to Shemitah applied, you weren't even allowed to plant if it was 30 days of the Tosefes Shvius. So let's say Tosefes Shvius was Shavuos time. You couldn't even plant up until Erev Shavuos. You would have to do it 44 days before. If the Tosefes Shvius started at Shavuos time, you would have to have planted 44 days before Shavuos.
It's 44 days before.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't actually say the 44 days. He said it to be 30 days of Shvius. So I don't know if once it's already Tosefes Shvius, I don't know if he's worrying about the extra 2 weeks or not. I don't know. But nowadays you're allowed to plant until 14 days before Shemitah because the problem is only a problem of Tosefes Shvius. Meaning, if the problem would have been Maris Ayin, it looks like you're planting on Shemitah, there would be no heter even nowadays. But he holds that the problem isn't Maris Ayin, it's just a problem of Tosefes Shvius. And since nowadays there's no Tosefes Shvius, because the Beis Hamikdash doesn't build, because Halacha Moshe Sinai is that the Tosefes Shvius starts 30 days before Shemitah. So nowadays, you don't need to do 44 days before, you don't need to plant it 44 days before Rosh Hashanah of Shemitah. As long as you plant it 2 weeks before Shemitah, it's fine, according to this Rash. According to the opinion who say it's prohibited, because if it would take root within 30 days before Rosh Hashanah Shemitah, Rosh Hashanah of Shemitah, according to the opinions that the reason is because you count Orla based on that Rosh Hashanah of Tishrei, so then it appears that you would plant it during Shemitah. Therefore, the fruits would only be permitted after the 4th year Rosh Hashanah because of the dinim of Orla. And the Balamor in Rosh Hashanah says, right, so there's a machlokas if it's Rosh Hashanah or Tu B'Shvat, and the Balamor holds that it's prohibited not just until Rosh Hashanah, you'd have to wait till Tu B'Shvat of the 4th year to have from this fruit. So there's a machlokas about Rishonim about the date for Orla. Okay, Perek Revi in the Rambam. Kosher totzi art b'shana shvius. Bein min azer shnafel v'mikon shvius. Bein ham min ha'ikram shniktum v'kodem v'chazor v'asu u'shneim nikru sviach. Anything that that comes out of the land in the 7th year, whether it was a seed that had fallen before Rosh Hashanah started, or whether it was some type of root that was harvested before and it just regenerated and started growing by itself. So neither case did you actually plant something, but in one case it did come from a seed that a human dropped, not necessarily in a form of planting. Or if it just regenerated itself from the ground and it grew on Shmitta, u'shneim nikru sviach. These are both called svichim. So svichim are basically things that grow. I mean, some translate it as aftergrowth, but it doesn't have to necessarily be considered an aftergrowth. It could be something that grew for the first time, but we call both of those sviach. Meaning, if it's from something that regenerated, it was already in the ground, we understand what's called aftergrowth. But aftergrowth doesn't completely explain the first situation. Yeah, Marty? Right. The pasuk says sviach. So this is a rabbinic law. Whether it's from grasses or vegetables that grew by themselves and they don't have real seeds, they're all permitted to be eaten on the Torah law. That which was the land during the rest of the land, it's for you to eat. Even a field that was improved on Shmitta and things grew, peroseha mutar b'achila. On a Torah law, you'd be allowed to eat it. Meaning, it sounds like you improved the field, but you didn't necessarily plant it. So the pasuk says the sefiach of your harvest you can't harvest, meaning you're not allowed to harvest in a way that you harvest in a regular year. And if you actually harvested it in the way that regular gatherers harvest fields, loka, you would get lashes. Like you were kosher the entire field, and you made a pile, and then you eventually had the oxen or the cattle thresh it, or you harvest it in order that you can work the land, as we explained before. You only could harvest a little bit, and then you beat it instead of doing a real threshing, and then you eat it. So this was a machlokas rishonim that we saw. The Rambam's opinion is that you can't harvest in a way that's the regular way that shows like you're the owner. Whereas according to many rishonim on the Mishnayos, you can't even use the regular tools. The regular tool that they would cut the grapes off with, they couldn't use the regular the charba. They had to use a charba instead of the regular tool. And then that also spoke about, the Mishnah also spoke about, you can't press it in the regular wine press. So that's similar to not threshing the regular thing, but you have to do it in a smaller container. And same thing about the olives. So let's just read halacha beis before we see Rav Kook's commentary. We divrei sofrim shu kol svichim asur b'achila. But rabbinically, it's more than just rabbinic. But the sofrim is early. It's a rabbinic decree. Shu kol svichim asur b'achila. Anything that grew by itself, whether from seeds that fell or whether it was stuff in the ground that regenerated by itself, they're all forbidden to be eaten. V'lama gazru aleim. Why did they decree that it's forbidden to eat them? B'pnei ovrei avera. Because of the people who transgressed the law, that he won't go and plant grain or beans or garden vegetables and stuff in his field secretly. And then when they grow, he'll eat them. And say, oh, they grew by themselves. But there are a lot of people who do things like that, so therefore they've prohibited anything that anything that grew. They prohibited any svichim that were growing on shvius. Now, obviously, this doesn't apply to trees, because trees are going to yield fruit without you doing anything. So this is talking about stuff that would come from a seed that you would have to plant by the year. Okay, Rav Kook. According to the Radvaz, in the commentary on this Rambam, a field that was improved, even though there's a knas. We fine the person like a punishment fine that he's not allowed to plant the field in the 8th year, as we discussed way back in the first chapter. Nevertheless, anything that field yielded, if it doesn't have the din of svichim, which are also for its own reason, even if there was a benefit for the fact that he was improving it in regard to basically saying in the 8th year, it's not a problem. So it's in the fields that you had improved during the 7th year, so that we punish you and say you're not allowed to plant it in the 8th year. If something grew by itself like this in the 8th year, you're allowed to use it. It's not even a Issur D'Rabbanan. Because in the 8th year, because you, the owner of the field, it's your fruit, then we're able to punish you. But in the Shmitta itself, when the peiros are ownerless, we don't fine you. And Rashi in Yevamos and the Rash in the 8th parak, and the Ramban in Yevamos, and the Rashba says, so the Ashkenazi Rishonim, that which it's mutter to eat them on Shmita if you violated the prohibition against Shmita for fruits, as we explained. But when I say fruits here, it probably means vegetables. If you, for example, you guarded your field and didn't let people in the manner of being hefker, even though you violated a positive mitzvah of the Torah, your fruits are not forbidden, and you're allowed to eat them according to the biur. And after the biur, it depends according to what exactly the biur is, and we're going to explain later. Now this is okay. So now, right, I was going to say it doesn't make sense that Rashi says that. Oh, because the Ramban on Chumash brings Rashi saying something else. But here Rav Kook says that Rashi brought this in Yevamos in the name of his teachers. That Rashi's in his teachers, and the Ramban in Parshas, the Ramban that I actually had on the source sheet, was it that Ramban? No, it's a different Ramban, but a different Ramban in Parshas Bahar. He quotes it Rashi, but Rav Kook is saying it's Rashi's Rabbi, that if you had guarded the field so it wasn't able to be ownerless, you are not allowed to eat that fruit at all, because the Torah only allowed you to eat fruit that was kept ownerless. And it doesn't matter even if you harvested it in an irregular way, you're only allowed to do it you're still not allowed to eat this. Now, as I recall, Rashi himself, I think, says, maybe it's in Sukkah, that after you harvest it, you could then declare it ownerless, and then you'd be allowed to eat it. Meaning you guarded the field, you didn't let people come in, you harvested it. And then at this point, if you would pile it outside your house and say it's hefker, then once you said it's hefker, then you'd be allowed to take it. So the way I understand that Rashi, which maybe I understand it incorrectly, but the way I understand that opinion of Rashi or Rashi's Rebbe's, whoever it may be, is that even if you didn't treat it ownerless at the beginning of the year, you could still make it up. So then, so we didn't go into detail about the biur. We only spoke a little bit about the biur on Shavuos night. But according to the Ramban, brings down these opinions and other things. So according to the opinions that biur is after a certain date, because according to the Rambam, once it's no longer available for the animals in the field, you have to destroy it. According to the Ravid, there's a hybrid thing. There's a first biur when it's not available in your local place, then you have to declare it ownerless, which is this, and then you could declare it ownerless and then take it back, but it has to be declared ownerless. But then after they know for sure that there's no, even not locally, it's not available in for the wild animals anymore, then it has to be destroyed. And then the Ramban and many other Rishonim's opinion is that the whole biur is only once it's not available for the fields, for the wild animals, then you have to declare it ownerless. So there's different opinions. So you have to find 3 people, but they say it could be people who are friends, and they're not going to take it yourself, but you have to declare it ownerless. Or if there's no people, you have to bring it to the street. The shuk, it says, even when you know after no one's walking in there anymore, you go put in a field and you have to yell loud, even though there's no one to hear you. It's ownerless. Then you fulfilled your obligation. So that's more of a legal fiction, I think, than this. If you're really saying it's ownerless and you let people take it and you take some of it yourself. So the way I understand, but even the Ramban does say though that if you didn't make it declare it ownerless in the proper way when you had to, then you do have to destroy it. But it's different than the Ravid's opinion. According to him, if you would have done it properly, there's no time that you would actually have to destroy the produce. And according to the Gra, in his Shnosel commentary on the Mishnah, that you're never allowed to harvest the Perush Shvius, even if it was ownerless, even if it's in an irregular way. You would have to like break it off manually. It sounds like according to the Gray, you can't even use any tool, not even an irregular tool. Okay, that's a big chumrah. So then for the Rambam bays that midrabanan all svichim are prohibited. The Shnos Elio, again, the same, the Vilna Gaon, it's a different in a different place, but this Vilna Gaon says that even on a Torah law, you're not allowed to eat the svichim, except some type of kruv, which we translate as cabbage, is okay because it's very close to a tree, and trees don't apply to svichim. So what exactly kruv is cabbage? The way cabbage grows, the cabbage we grow does not look like a tree, so it would probably mean something else. What does Professor Felix say? Hail. So it's not up. If you look at it, it looks almost like it does look like a tree. As big as it does look like a little tree. So according to we think broccoli is we thought when we were kids we called it little trees. So I guess even though it's not the height of a tree, but it looks like a tree, so that's a special akula. And Rashi and Pesachim says that svichim are only aser from the time of the beer and later. So that's a kula that according to Rashi, at the time that you're allowed to gather other stuff, you're also allowed to gather svichim. So halacha gimel, it's a long, Rav Kook has a lot. So we'll just read the halacha and then we'll leave it here. So we see that the only thing you're allowed to eat from shvius produce is stuff that grows from trees or grasses that majority of people don't grow. So again, so this here, when we did the Mishnayos, went through the different opinions of what the translate. This is rue and amaranth. But hashotim is a wild thing. But vegetables that most people plant in their gardens and types of produce and beans, it has to be planted. Any of those things that grow is forbidden midrabanan. So anyone who gathers them receives rabbinic lashes. And we spoke on Shavuos night that the Rambam never mentions oats are based in it all. So according to him, it seemed it would be very difficult to have any mechanism where you could use those stuff on Shmitta. So according to the Rambam, you would have to import grains. You could have challahs for Shabbos and matzahs for Pesach. I don't really see any other way around it. Okay, so that one we'll restart with this halacha next week. And thank you for coming.